Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're on chapter 25, verse 2. We're talking about the idea of Shemitah, and we were about to see a Ramban. It's around the middle of the first Ramban on Pasuk Beis, beginning with the words Vinei Hayamim. It's about 20 lines or so into the Ramban. Vinei Hayamim, Remez Lasher Bara B'Masa Bereishis, Va'ashanim Yirmazu, Lasher Yiyah B'Brias Kol Me'olam. So when we talk about marking 7 days, which of course that's what we do every week, that the seventh day is Shabbos, that is intended to parallel the days of God's creation of the world. When we talk about the sets of 7 years, where the seventh year is Shemitah, there's clearly a parallel between Shabbos and Shemitah. Shabbos, we refrain from all kinds of activity, and Shemitah, we refrain from working the land. The Shemitah cycle is intended to parallel what will be the world history, all the days of the world. Meaning that there's this famous idea that the world is supposed to be around for 6,000 years, and then after, if it hasn't happened already, once it comes to the year 6,000. Then it's sort of like this otherworldly experience, whatever that means. There's all kinds of opinions about what happens then, but something different happens. So we think of our observance of Shabbos as paralleling the 6 days of creation, and then God refrained from working anymore, from creating anymore, and that was Shabbos. So we mark Shabbos by refraining from work. So Shemitah parallels the 7,000th year, beginning from right after year 6,000, and that everything is in rest. So it's an interesting thing. Therefore, Shemitah is such a grave prohibition, and the Torah is more strict about Shemitah than so many other things prohibited in the Torah. A recurring theme in that we'll have in this week's Torah reading is that if the Jewish people don't keep Shemitah appropriately, we get sent out of the land of Israel. That's similar to things that are said in the idea of illicit sexual relations, which is such a foundational thing in terms of how we lead our lives. The Ramban says it's fascinating that we're treating inappropriate sexual dynamics with the same way as Shemitah. That seems to be some technical halacha about how we farm our fields. The Torah repeats this many times, that the land will expel them and have a response for its days of rest, meaning that people didn't appropriately keep the years of Shemitah, and that's why they're exiled. It's actually this week's parak Pirkei Avos. The exile comes from different miscarriages of justice in one way or another, and inappropriate conduct in terms of the Shemitah year. The Ramban says the meaning of all this is because if you don't buy into Shemitah, you're not buying into the fact that God created the world. And you're not buying into the concept of a world to come. And this gets back to what the Ramban was saying about the days of the week and the years of the Shemitah cycle. So very, very interesting. Okay, let's move on. Let's go on to chapter 25, but verse 17. And actually, let's start with verse 14. Verse 14. V'chisim karumim karla misecha, when you sell something to your friend, o kano miyara misecha, or you acquire something from your friend, al tonu ish es achiv. Do not afflict one person should not afflict another person. And this is the fascinating halacha of ona'ah. Ona'ah is overcharging. It's very complicated. It's very complicated to understand when that applies, when that doesn't apply. But the basic idea is if there's a set price, if there's clearly a market value for something, and people in your circumstances clearly sell it for a certain range, and you are selling it totally out of that range, that's a Torah prohibition, an interesting thing. Now, the Torah gets into some details in terms of laws, in terms of selling land. And now in verse 17, V'lo sonu ish es amiso. And you shouldn't afflict one his friend. V'yareisem elokecha. You should have reverence for God. Ki ani Hashem elokecha. Because I am Hashem your God. This, of course, just jumps out. You said 3 psukim ago we're not supposed to afflict each other. So is this the same type of affliction? Is this a different type of affliction? The first one we understood as being overcharging. What's this talking about? So if you look at Rashi on Pasuk Yud Zayin, v'lo sonu ish es amiso, kan hisir alo noas dvarim. This is a totally different prohibition, says Rashi. Shelo yakned es chavero, that a person shouldn't say hurtful things to one's friend. Where does it say in the Torah that I can't taunt you? Rashi would say this is the pasuk where it says that in the Torah. V'lo yasienu eitza she'eino hugenas lo, v'darko v'anaso shel yoetz. Rashi says there's another thing included in here, which is to intentionally give someone bad advice. Let's say I don't know. Let's say I sell pizzas, and somebody comes to me and they're asking for advice about what to do with their indigestion. And I said, well, I'll tell you, pizza is wonderful for indigestion. So obviously I'm giving a pretty obvious example, but Scott's giving a knowing nod, by the way. But the bottom line is, if I intentionally give you bad advice, that will be to my benefit. But you can have all kinds of examples of this. And to be honest with you, many times people are very challenged in this area, especially the person they're talking to might not realize they have other, maybe conflicts of interest, maybe other issues going on in their lives. The Rashi says, if you're guilty of that, that's also violation of this, afflicting one's friend. Now this Rashi ends off in a way that he ends off in various places of Chumash, but it's always powerful. Let's say it's not as obvious as pizzas with indigestion. I tell someone, I don't think a certain job is for you. He's trying to figure out what to apply for. And it turns out that I don't think the job is for him because my cousin is applying for the job. Prove it. Prove that that's the reason I told you not to apply for the job. Maybe it's just a coincidence. How can you read my mind? That's why the pasuk continues in verse 17. Have reverence for your God. You know what? God knows. God knows. So there are certain types of sins that you might know you're being sinful. By the way, sometimes you might not know you're being sinful. Sometimes you might not be honest enough with your own intentions, but maybe you know you're being sinful, but you say to people, prove it. So that's why we say because God will know. An interesting thing. If you look at Sforno on Pasuk Yud Zayin, no, it's here. Sorry. Yeah, Sforno on Pasuk Yud Zayin. Below Sonu, Afilu b'dvarim ugnevas das ve'etzos ra'os afilu bilti shum drara de mamona. So the Sforno says similar to Rashi. Sforno says, don't give bad advice, even if it doesn't involve a loss of money in any way. In other words, it's not like the earlier example where I'm overcharging you or something like that. Let's say I'm just giving you advice that I know is bad for you. But he says he focuses not on V'yareisem Elokecha, fear your God, but the phrase after that, because I am Hashem your God. And Sforno says, Elokea Koneh ve'Elokea Mocher. I'm both of your gods. It's very interesting. Elokechem means you, the plural. So the Sforno says the point being made here, because we're talking about how we treat other Jews. That's the context of the puzzle. The point being made here is, I'm the God of both of you. I'm interested in how all of you are treated. And this is an interesting thing. Many times in our interpersonal relationships, we really focus on ourselves. And you gotta look out for number one. So I do this, I do that, and I don't really think so much about how that impacts you. And so the Sforno's perspective on Kini Hashem Elokechem is you might not be thinking about how much it impacts the other person, but God's interested in how it impacts the other person. And God doesn't see himself as only your God. Again, this is so elementary, but there are situations where people would be well served to think about all this. Moving on to verse 36. This is another fascinating halacha, the prohibition on charging interest. We're prohibited from charging fellow Jews interest. When you think about it, and I can't tell you, this is a halacha today. It's a Torah violation to charge other Jews interest. So many people call me up and say the following situation: I'm not trying to build a financial empire. I have my money in an investment, and I'm taking my money out of the investment to lend money to another person. I'm doing an act of kindness. I want to just charge the person what I'd be making in the investment. That's also what the Torah is talking about. That's also prohibited. There is a loophole, something called the heteriska. If anyone's ever interested, you can contact me. I definitely have helped people arrange heteriskas in the past. But it's important to understand that the basic halach is it's prohibited. So the Torah says, verse 36, don't take from the person interest, have reverence for your God. Your brother should live with you. What's that talking about? Your brother should live with you. I'm all for people living with me. We should all live. We should all be well. But you could have said that after many psukim in the Torah. So let's start with the Ramban. Ramban on pasuk lamed vav that he should live with you. V'hi mitzvahs aseh lach yoso. This is the positive mitzvah to keep other people living. It wasn't so long ago we saw a Ramban that spoke about that even though I have mitzvos, I'm not supposed to, normally speaking, I'm not supposed to sacrifice my life for the observance of mitzvos. That's me. But how do I know there's an idea that I have this mitzvah to help you live? The Ramban says it's this pasuk. We have a positive directive to do whatever we need to do to save another person's life. But there's a famous drasha from this. Your brother should live with you. Zu darash ben potiri. Shnayim shayu mahalchin b'derech u'biyad echem me'em kiton shomayim. Im shosu magil yishuv. V'im shneim shosim. Shneim mesim. Famous ethical question. Two people are walking in a desert. One of them is holding a flask of water. There's enough water in the flask to have one person survive. If they split it, neither one of them will survive. What are you supposed to do? Darash ben Potiri, mutav yishtu shteyim v'yamusu. Ben Potiri says, heaven forbid, I should take the water that you should die. Better we both drink and we both die. And it shouldn't be that either one of us is the cause of the other person's death because we drank too much. One person shouldn't see his friend's death. Rabbi Akiva learns from this pasuk that your own life comes first, because it says your brother should live with you, implying that I need to live, but I need to help my brother live. Meaning that if I have the ability to save myself, we're not talking about killing my brother to have me survive. That's a different story. That's actively killing a person. That's prohibited. But saving myself, even if that, drinking the water, even if that means that the other person won't live, Rabbi Akiva says, I should drink the water, because that's implied in the pasuk. My brother should live along with me. Chayecha kodmim. My own life comes first. This is a very famous drasha. Many apply this lesson to all kinds of circumstances. I'm not going to take the time to see it inside with you, but I do want to share the Sforno applies it, or a similar model, to the concept of lending money, that it's a great mitzvah to lend money to another Jew, but I only should be lending money to a Jew if I can afford it. In other words, if I'm going to start needing to collect charity because I lent out too much money to you, that's not what I'm supposed to be doing. So just that's sort of an interesting model as well. So we discussed the Ramban, who's giving a perspective on why Shemitah is such an important mitzvah. We discussed Rashi and the Sforno in the issue of misleading another person. And we discussed the Ramban and the Sforno in this very interesting pasuk of having your brother live with you.